Good evening, Strong Stance listeners. I'm your host, Eli Strong, and welcome to another installment of the Strong Stance Stories. For those not familiar with the Strong Stance Stories, this is the newest flavor of the podcast, and it's simply storytelling. These particular episodes will feature all types of stories from all types of trans and gender non-conforming people. The aim here is to showcase our community's voices and lived experiences and to provide an outlet for art and expression. We are continually looking for stories, and at the end of the show, I'll give you a little more information about how to submit those stories. Now, I'm calling today's episode Family Matters. Each of these segments will feature a story about events involving a family member or members. I have some amazing stories for you today about pain, about joy, and hopefully you'll laugh a bit along the way as well. So sit back, relax, and welcome to the Strong Stance Stories. One of the things I'm going to try to do on each of these episodes is to get the ball rolling with a story of my own. So our first story on this episode comes from the days of my teenage past in the late 90s. This is a story I'm calling Expectations. My cousin Natalie got married when I was 17, and I was a bridesmaid. In fact, 2 cousins got married that summer, and I was a bridesmaid in both weddings. I mean, if you really want to look at the whole picture, with 22 first cousins, I have been a bridesmaid 7 times, a flower girl once, a groomsman once, and a crucifer once, in family weddings alone. But back to the point. When I was 17, my cousin Natalie got married, and I was a bridesmaid. Before the wedding, a bunch of the bridesmaids, mostly cousins, got together and went to the beach for a bachelorette weekend. I was the only person under the age of 21, and my mom didn't want me to get left behind. She trusted my older cousins, and with good reason. They were like big sisters to me. They had been there my whole life and had been my first babysitters. They spent summers with us so that they could have a teen vacation away from their parents, and my parents could continue to work without paying for a massive amount of childcare for my younger brother and I. Since Mom didn't want me to miss out on the fun, she suggested, in a very wink-wink, nudge-nudge kind of way, that if I knew anybody that can get me a fake ID, that it might be a good idea for this trip. She trusted me not to do anything crazy, or to consume massive amounts of alcohol, and she knew that if we went to a few clubs, my cousins would take care of me. It just so happened that my senior prom date could make me a fake ID, and as friends, he was more than happy to do so. So he took the photo from either my driver's license or my high school student ID, I honestly can't remember which, and made me a fake ID from the state of California, a state that, I should mention, I had never been anywhere near. So off I went, down to Florida, with my California fake ID and my cousins for the bachelorette party. It was a great trip, and it gave me a chance to spend time with my cousins without our parents around. We all stayed in a condo, and I shared a room with the cousin closest to my age, Leslie. Leslie and I had shared a room before, when my mom's job took her to Australia for about a month and my brother and I lived with her family. She's 4 years older than me, and growing up was the closest thing I had to a sister. One night that weekend, she told me that she knew that one of my best friends, Andrea, was a lesbian. So, let me back up for a second and just say that there was this weird, coincidentally webbed friendship that existed between me and Leslie. One of my best friends, Andrea, was cousins with my cousin Leslie's best friend. And Andrea's dad was friends with my mom back in school, and our brothers wrestled on the same team. Andrea and I both identified as lesbians at the time, but not many of our people in our family knew. Well, Leslie and Andrea's cousin had a pretty good idea that we were gay, and just wanted us to know that we could trust them. So right around the time that Leslie was telling me that she knew Andrea was gay, Andrea was sitting in a hot tub getting the same conversation from her cousin. Obviously, we both spilled the beans. Yes, we're lesbians. No, we aren't together, but we are dear friends. Yes, we trust you guys. No, most of the rest of the family doesn't know. It was actually pretty funny when we both realized that we were simultaneously being coaxed out of the closet by our cousins, who had, either knowingly or not, concocted a plot to find out the truth. I remember being relieved that Leslie wasn't mad. I remember feeling like the rest of the vacation was going to go smoothly now that at least one person knew. And I remember the last thing Leslie said to me right before we went to sleep that night. Just please promise me you won't cut off all your hair. Most of my cousins at the time, myself included, had long, thick brown hair. It was kind of a family thing. And to be honest, at the time, the thought had never even crossed my mind. Oh no, that's not going to happen. Flash forward not even a year later, and basically all of my hair was gone. So, not so great keeping that promise. So anyway, the rest of the trip was pretty great. We hit a couple dance clubs, we danced, and of course the entire time I was panicked that I would get into trouble if anyone at the bars found out my ID was fake. One bouncer actually did notice. I was last in line walking into the bar. It was clear that we were all together, and he stopped me and said, "Look, I know this is fake, but I also know that you're here with these girls. I'm going to let you in, but please don't make me regret it." Dude scared me so bad, I did not have a single drink at that bar, but we still had a really great time. Now that could have been enough. Good enough on its own for this trip. But oh no, not for me. I was feeling brazen. I'd come out to my cousin. I had been in a bunch of clubs with a fake ID. What other crazy crap could I come up with? So at some point, I decided it would be a really great idea to use that fake ID to get a tattoo. Genius, I know. So I tell Leslie about my plan. I'm going to see how much money I have left at the end of the weekend. And if I have enough, there's a tattoo that I've been wanting to get. We could just stop by the shop on our way out of town. So the weekend comes to a close, and I have just enough for a small tattoo, which was perfect, because I was looking for something small that I could hide. I still lived in my mother's house, and she wasn't the biggest fan of permanent ink on skin. We go into the shop, and I try to act like I belong, that I'm not legally too young to be there or have this thing done. I find a tattoo design that's pretty close to what I was thinking, and I go talk to the artist on duty. He has me fill out some paperwork and then asks for my ID. Moment of truth. He takes a brief look at it, writes my info down on the form, and as if to remind me not to screw it up, Leslie slaps me on the shoulder and, a little louder than necessary, says, "Sign it, Sharon." As you might have guessed, Sharon was the name on the ID. It was not my name. And I almost cracked up from just her saying it. I signed the fake name and waited my turn. Leslie went to grab some lunch next door while I waited, and the guy in the chair getting his newest tattoo started chatting me up. Now, let me just say, I was a shade creeped out. The place was small, with only one tattoo chair and no real privacy walls to speak of. Also, this was 1998, I was 17, and I had never known anyone with anything more than a butterfly on their shoulder blade. The guy doing the tattooing that day was mostly bald, with a tire of hair around the back of his head and a tattoo on his scalp of a spider in a web. The guy getting tattooed was probably in his 40s or 50s, and he just kept telling me, "Oh, don't worry, it doesn't hurt that much. I've got tons of them. You'll be fine. But be careful, they're addictive, you know." I couldn't tell whether he was genuinely trying to be nice or if he was trying to flirt with a 17-year-old girl. I mean, this was the kind of place whose business cards had the most mangy, hungover, rough-looking cartoon rat I had ever seen, with tattoos, slumped posture, and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. The whole experience was kind of surreal. I do still have one of those business cards somewhere, though. I couldn't get over how weirded out by it I was, and yet how much I just had to have one. So anyway, the guy in the chair gets finished, and it's my turn. And just before he leaves the chair, he looks over at me and goes, "Now come on up here and get your little tickle." Gross. So now it's my turn. I go behind the small counter and sit on the chair and wait. When the whole thing starts, I have to admit that Mr. Creeper was right. It didn't hurt too much. About halfway through the process, Leslie comes back with food, and when it's all done, they dress it up, and I get in the car for the 5 to 6 hour drive back home. "Your mom's going to kill me," was all I remember Leslie saying. "Not if she doesn't find out," I replied. I will always love Leslie for being there with me and for me that weekend, for pushing me to be honest with her, and not being afraid to maybe get into some trouble with me, even though she was supposed to be the responsible older cousin. Mom eventually found out about the tattoo, At a full house family function, I might add, and was furious. But she eventually got over it. I cut my hair several times, which everyone also got over. And now I have 5 tattoos and planning a 6th. So I guess Mr. Creeper was also right about them being addictive. I tell you all this to say that once upon a time, a 17-year-old lesbian got a fake ID, was too afraid to use it to acquire booze, but not to acquire a permanent purple cross with flowers on her lower back, cut her hair, started hormones and had surgery, changed his name, grew his hair back out, and now he's a 34-year-old man with long hair and a tramp stamp. And now everyone keeps asking me when I'm going to cut off all my hair. So I guess you just can't meet everyone's expectations. Our next story comes to us from none other than my brother, my man crush Monday, my partner in crime, my best friend on this planet, Julian. Julian's story is very raw and for some listeners may be very emotional, so be advised. Here's his story he's calling Black and Blue.
I can't really remember when I decided I really needed to transition, but I know it was sometime in my early 20s, around the time I learned that it was possible. I knew that it was going to be the right thing for me. I want to start by saying that my mom has always been a huge figure in my life, someone that I've always looked up to and admired for her strength and her intelligence, and I think that she's just awesome. But we've had our ups and downs. So after I decided I was going to transition, I actually probably spent 5 years in therapy, thinking about what it would mean for the relationship I have with my mom. I think for a long time, she lived vicariously through me. She had kids really young. She got married really young, and had to defer a lot of her aspirations and goals in order to take care of me and my younger sister. So it was really important for me, my whole life, to try to be a good kid, try to be someone who didn't cause a lot of problems. And so I never really got in trouble, and I never really made any decisions that might just be disappointing to her. But I felt that transition was something that I really needed to do for myself. And so I had begun the, transition to creating my own boundaries and trying to live my life the way that I needed to in order to be happy. So, after about 5 years, I wrote a letter to my mother explaining what I had been doing and how I had actually already started testosterone and that I needed to do this. And I know that, for someone who's transitioning, we go through a lot of processing, thinking, learning. And so a lot of times when we tell our parents or loved ones, we have to recognize that they haven't gone through that processing period or that mourning period of losing a person that they've known their whole life. And so it's, important to give them time. But at the same time, you're cautiously optimistic that they'll be supportive and understand what you're doing and why you need to do it, and that it doesn't mean that you love them any less or any of that. So, after writing, I got a letter. Well, I don't know if it was a letter. I can't remember. But I got some correspondence from her. It was disapproval, and also letting me know that I was no longer